introduction. Thanks for the invitation to be with you, to share some thoughts, and to be involved in some conversation in a moment.
Where's the volume on this?
I have selected as the topic for my presentation, Saving the World One Bicycle at a Time. Now, in order to get us in the right frame of mind for this conversation, I'd like you to just pause with me for a moment, get in a very comfortable position, turn off your cell phones, reading material, and just concentrate just for a second. Think. How many people at this very moment are stuck in traffic on their way to ride a stationary bike in a health club? In a moment. We'll come back to that in a moment. I don't have to tell you that our nation is facing unprecedented challenges in the economic realm, politically, with federal budget issues. I think I need that already? Is that as well as the challenge that we dare not name, climate change. These challenges are at once more serious than people think, yet they're not beyond our capacity to solve for the benefit of our families and for the planet. There is actually quite a bit of agreement in Washington, D.C. and amongst independent analysts. The trend lines that we have, for example, for spending simply are not sustainable. There's agreement on some of the failures that we've had in the past in areas of healthcare, defense, agricultural waste. The agricultural programs are probably a modest amount of waste, but seriously wrong-headed policies. And there is broad agreement, dating back again to President Nixon, that we should not be held hostage to our addiction to foreign oil. But you need to understand that there are two competing worldviews on how these principles are organized. The majority view of my colleagues in the House of Representatives appears to be, very simply, that America is overtaxed, overregulated. It's restricting the freedoms of Americans while constricting their entrepreneurial spirit. This is evidenced most recently by the government takeover of healthcare. Global warming is the greatest hoax ever inflicted on gullible people, and our crushing debt and unsustainable spending is turning us into Greece. Their solution is simple: back off, just turn America loose, except for gay rights and reproductive freedom for women, and we'll be back on the road to greatness as long as we crush the unions. There's an alternative view that we have not suffered a near collapse of the economy because of too much regulation, but because of a lack of adult supervision that allowed Wall Street greed to almost destroy the economy. Government oversight is necessary for things ranging from food safety to environmental protection. Significant government spending was necessary to halt economic damage, to prevent more layoffs, loss of health care, and indeed institutional collapse. In this view, unions aren't the enemy. They are part of the solution. They have been an engine of middle-class advance, and in fact, people note that in the era of strongest economic prosperity that the United States has ever seen, from post-World War II until the early 70s, we had the highest percentage of union participation in our economy. Extending health care to 33 million Americans while fixing the system, no longer denying insurance to people because of pre-existing conditions or preventing the cancellation of insurance just because you get sick, is not a takeover, but is a reasonably, if modest, reform. These two conflicting worldviews are fiercely held by competing political interests. They're sincere, but they both can't be right. I would suggest that we think small for a couple moments. The bicycle was sort of a metaphor for what I think is wrong for America, with America, and how we can fix it. Thinking again now, how many of those people are stuck in traffic on their way to ride a stationary bike in a health club? The bicycle is the most efficient form of urban transportation ever devised. But in much of America, it's ignored, or worse, it's discouraged. Few of our children can walk or bike safely to school anymore in most American communities. And in fact, in some, it's against the rules for children to walk or bike on their own. No wonder we are worried about morbidly obese 250-pound fifth graders. In this country, we continue to lavish resources upon single-occupant vehicles. There are tax breaks for the commuters. Our land use patterns and transportation funding are focused on that element of the transportation system, with only a tiny fraction going to bike and pedestrian facilities and safety. That last point is important. Only 1% of the resources go there. 15% of the traffic fatalities, bike and pedestrian. For me, it's very personal. For the last 15 years, I have biked to work every day on Capitol Hill. I have burned hundreds of thousands of calories. I've never been stuck in traffic. I've never been unable to find a parking place. By investing in real estate instead of a vehicle, burning calories instead of fossil fuel, I'm several $100,000 to the good. And as you know, this has significance for the typical American family because transportation is the number 2 item in the family budget, and for poor Americans, it's the number 1 item in the budget, even higher for them than housing. I've watched in my hometown of Portland, Oregon, which after all is not just Beervana with more brew pubs than any place else on the planet, we think, or, you know, the sort of the vision of Portlandia, where young people go to retire. Portland is also America's bicycle capital. We have increased cycling over 400% in our community since 1990. And we've been able to achieve a 9% mode split. In some parts of the city, it's up to 25%, 200 miles of bike lane, all for the cost of 1 mile of urban freeway. The costs are pretty dramatic in terms of what you can do applying simple, common sense technology. Some of you are familiar with the Hawthorne Bridge in Portland. Over the course of the 20 years, it has increased traffic 20%. But because 19 of those 20% were bicycles, we were able to accommodate that increase with less than $100,000 worth of investment. If it had been accommodated via the car, it would have cost $20 million to retrofit the bridge. And one of the most powerful illustrations of how this works and why it works, and the fact that it does work, is that we have had local businesses request, and they have converted, 63 on-street parking spaces for 107 rather, 107 car spaces for bike corrals that will park 1,140 bicycles instead of the 107 cars. And we have over 50 requests that are pending. The business community has figured out that having more access via bikes means that they can accommodate more people to be in that brew pub, be in that independent bookstore, shop the street, the restaurant, and there's more room for the people who actually have to drive, because that bicycle on the road is one less car in front of you. There are a series of other metaphors for simple, common sense application of technology. I'm proud that our community has reintroduced the modern streetcar. The streetcar that defined American cities over a century ago. Well, it has been transformational in the parts of Portland that has been, in which it is located. It has attracted over $3 billion of private investment. It changes people's relationship to the streetscape. It enables housing to be built with less parking, in some cases no parking. And I'm pleased to say that if President Obama has the time next fall, he can come visit Portland for the newest extension of our streetcar system that is currently employing 1,800 people in its construction. And he'll be able to ride on the first American manufactured streetcar in 58 years. Simple, common sense application of proven technology, using existing right-of-ways, blending into the fabric of the community, giving people more choices, less cost, less environmental impact. But there are any number of additional strategies that we should be thinking about. I referenced agriculture a moment ago. Currently, we have a rather embarrassing situation where the United States continues to invest vast sums of money producing commodities that go to a handful of states, a minority of growers, to produce commodities, most of which the world has enough already. At the same time, we're denying support for farmers and ranchers who grow food. Oregon is discriminated against in this situation. 87% of our farmers and ranchers get nothing from the federal government. No credit for the nursery stock, for the world-class fruit, vegetables, spectacular wine. We're instead channeling those resources to the commodities which are used to supersize our kids in school with the surplus food. And it reaches such ridiculous lengths that we are using, we're growing cotton in the desert, subsidizing the water, subsidizing the production of the cotton, in such a blatant disregard to international trade agreements that we are actually having a penalty of paying farmers in Brazil $147 million a year because we refuse to correct our own inefficiencies. Think for a moment what would happen if we cut that farm investment in half, and instead of subsidizing the commodities, we helped focus agricultural investments for farmers to respect and protect water quality and water quantity. if we were investing in farmers markets, a permanent farmers market in every substantial community around the country, if we were subsidizing the provision of fresh fruit and vegetables locally grown to our schools. It's an opportunity for us to strengthen the bonds with local agriculture, protect land uses, put more money in the pockets of our farmers and ranchers, and produce health in the community. As Michael Pollan has famously pointed out, there is a reason that a package of Twinkies costs less than a bunch of carrots, because that's the direction of the agricultural subsidies, to the detriment of our communities, our children, and our future. There's also a pretty dramatic disconnect between what is being advanced on the political agenda in terms of what people think or say they're doing in the interests of the public. They're responding to public needs as opposed to where the public actually is. One of the most dramatic examples is to be found today in Wisconsin, where Governor Walker, who never mentioned this radical agenda in the course of his campaign, is moving beyond simply extracting concessions of wages and benefits from public employees and seeking to actually eliminate their ability to bargain collectively. At the same time, there's been some $2 billion in tax cuts for business, and tax increases are on their way with dramatic cutbacks to schools and local government. Or my favorite example is the current battle over public broadcasting. If you would have told me 2 years ago that I would be spending time trying to prevent Big Bird and Arthur the Anteater from being kneecapped by ideologues in Congress, I wouldn't have believed you. I thought we had run through that movie not once, not twice, but 3 times. But here we are back again. And in fact, the budget approved by my Republican colleagues in the House completely eliminates funding for public broadcasting starting in 2013. At the same time, it was kind of fun working with PBS to issue a survey, some survey research that they just completed last week, conducted by a respected Republican and a respected Democratic pollster, completely bipartisan, that showed that 78% of the American public want to keep funding for public broadcasting where it's at, not cut it, or increase it. Now, you'd expect that 92% of the lefty demos would support that, and they do, but 75% of independents say leave it alone or increase it, and 2/3 of the Republicans say leave it alone or actually increase it. This is an example of this disconnect, the alternative world that is driving some of the policy decisions, and it is not at all clear how effective we're going to be in this dynamic to be able to prevent at least some of this into coming to pass. But I think that the work that you are doing here this weekend, focusing on environmental protection and ways to express it in terms that the American public can understand and be involved with, is critical to our being able to reverse this trend that we're seeing politically. There is an opportunity to build consensus in communities and mobilize people around simple concepts and simple application of policy. We cannot continue as a nation to waste more energy than anybody else in the world and ship $1 billion a day overseas as a result of that waste. There is nothing that is involved with social engineering to give people transportation choices, to walk, bike, to use a streetcar, or God forbid, passenger rail service. The real social engineering is forcing families to have to burn a gallon of gas to buy a gallon of milk, to have separated land uses, to tie people, tether them to their single occupant vehicle. There is an opportunity for you to drive the concept that the federal government ought to lead by example when it comes to protecting the planet. The Obama administration has taken some initiatives that I salute, trying to prevent bulldozing mountaintops into streams, moving forward with amazing investments in energy, a commitment to higher speed intercity passenger rail, having the federal government get its act together is probably the single most powerful transformational act we can do, more important than any rule, regulation, tax, or demonstration. The Department of Defense is the largest consumer of energy in the world. The war in Iraq was 4 times more energy intense than the first Gulf War. And those big tankers that delivered gasoline to the front at a cost of over $100 a gallon was not just expensive, but dangerous. And hundreds of Americans have been killed and wounded transporting this energy source that might as well just have big bullseyes painted on the tankers. Having the federal government get serious about energy conservation, having the federal government, the largest generator of Superfund sites in the country, get serious about cleaning up after itself, having the General Services Administration, which manages a portfolio of over 300 million square feet of office with 60 portfolios of 1 million or more. This is the opportunity to be transformational in terms of achieving these goals that we're talking about. Finally, I'm hopeful that some of you certified smart people who are studying the environment and getting involved with the environment can work with us to think about a new mechanism for achieving environmental protection. I bleed green. I don't want to do anything that would undercut environmental protections. But there's got to be a better way, a more efficient way to achieve our goals and objectives. Why, when the state of California has environmental standards that are at least as high as the federal government's, why do we force a transit agency to go through 2 separate environmental compliance processes for the same project? It wastes money, it wastes time, it's inefficient, and it builds that friction and that irritation that, if we're not careful, will result in a backlash against environmental protections when the economy gets bad or we have some grim examples. If we can make this performance-driven, hold people accountable, there's an opportunity for us to clean up the environment, to save money, to bring people together, making progress and minimizing the opportunity of that backlash. I've been working with the people in Philadelphia for several years now who have a vision of a cleaner, cheaper, greener approach to dealing with their problem of combined sewer overflow. Less concrete and more green solutions, bioswales, opportunities to daylight creeks and restore wetlands, things that will have the same outcome at the end, but happen cheaper, faster, with a softer impact on the environment. These conversations have proceeded with EPA for a couple of years, and people acknowledge that it's interesting and it may have potential, but it's still stuck. It's not moving forward. In part, you can understand the stress EPA has been under. In the last administration, the EPA director was, well, we like to joke he was in the most effective witness protection program in history. He wouldn't come before Congress. He wouldn't be accountable. The people in the agency were dispirited. Their recommendations were routinely overruled. But we've got to find a way to empower people to get the job done rather than being caught up in process. And I would urge you to help us think through ways to hold people accountable for results, not simply going through procedural motions that might be duplicative or might be less efficient. We're counting on those of you who are of the younger generation. First of all, it's your world. You're going to live in it twice as long as the average politician. You are more prone to understand the facts, the threats, and the science. You are not yet totally addicted to oil and are willing and able to change. And you have the opportunity to help us cut through the clutter of Citizens United, Fox News, the Rush Limbaugh. You know, there's this huge megaphone of the purposely ill-informed, negative proponents of that first worldview that I gave you. But you understand ways to communicate, to connect. Look at what happened with the Obama campaign in 2008, where there was a whole parallel effort undertaken that really mobilized people in a way that was unprecedented. The Tea Party movement actually used some of the social networking, some of the new media, the technology, and were able to make some advances for their own purposes. Now, I'm not certain using it to protest taxation with representation was necessarily the most positive application of the technique and technology, but it illustrated the power. And today, as we look at the change that is sweeping across North Africa and in the Middle East, with government changes in Tunisia, Egypt, hopefully in Libya, the upset in Bahrain, this is an illustration of what's happening with younger generation taking power in their own hands and making a difference. Young people have fought and stopped wars. Young people initiated the environmental movement. Young people changed the landscape of the civil rights movement in this country forever. And now, the future of the planet, actually the future of your planet, is in play. I suggest we start with bicycles. Thank you very much.
I think we have a couple minutes for questions, so if you have a question, we have a microphone up here, and just form a line.
Hi. I know you've been an advocate for alternative transportation. Do you think Congress should fund the widening of Interstate 5 and the new Sunrise Freeway, which was approved December 2010?
Well, the decisions that will be made in metropolitan Portland will be driven by that region according to its comprehensive plan. I have been urging people, for instance, in the area of the so-called Sunrise Corridor to get real, that there is neither the money or the need for 8 lanes of freeway, that having an opportunity to have a parkway that is smaller scale, that blends in with the environment, that is less cost, actually will move more traffic, is a more appropriate solution. And I think that's where we're likely to go in that area. There will be, there's part of the problem with the I-5 is that there isn't the capacity to widen it. There's some work on the bridge and something that I feel very strongly about, putting light rail on the bridge. Having worked 15 years ago on a campaign to try and get light rail to Vancouver, being able to make that multimodal will be useful. I think there's a lot of hard thought thinking about scaling that down, but one of the problems that we face in downtown Portland is that capacity is constrained. And so spending a whole lot of money widening at other pinch points is just going to move the bottleneck down a little bit further.
Hey, I just first want to say thank you for your political worldview. It's as refreshing as apples and yogurt is to a cheeseburger from McDonald's. I just wanted to point out, you were talking about these huge tankers and all the various kinds of excess in the government spending and wastefulness, and I just wanted to question about how gluttony is kind of good for the economy. The more wasteful and the more we spend, well, that's growth, right? And corporations are increasing their profit. I mean, it might cost the planet, but it's good for the economy. So.
Well, I want to be clear that the United States, in my judgment, and there's financial stress that we're facing, but as a society, I think we're already spending enough money to have a much higher quality of life and better government services. The problem with healthcare is not that we're spending too much. As you know, we spend almost twice as much as other developed countries, and even though my colleagues claim that the United States has the best healthcare system in the world and are worried that we may do something like France or Canada, Great Britain or Germany, Japan, other uncivilized places, the facts are that people in those countries get sick less often, they get well faster, and they live longer. We can make those changes, whether it's defense spending. I mean, we can spend a lot less money and be safer as a nation. In agriculture, we can cut it in half, I'm convinced, in terms of the subsidies, and actually improve the quality of life, improve the environment, and make most farmers and ranchers better off and help them grow food. A part of what we need to do in this country is get real about how we're using our resources now. The waste of energy, the waste of food, the waste of land. We have an opportunity to do a much better job for the same or less resources, and we don't have to be punitive towards either the environment or to the people, particularly those most vulnerable.
Thank you.
Eric Fernandez with Oregon Wild. I appreciated hearing about some of your urban solutions, but I wanted to express my gratitude for your efforts in protecting wilderness around Mount Hood and the Columbia River Gorge. 125,000 acres of wilderness, and you did a lot of heavy lifting to get that across the finish line, so I wanted to thank you for that. In a changing climate, wilderness is a great way to protect Oregon's forests that store a ton of carbon, and it's one of the things that we can do as Oregonians is protecting our forests to help in curbing climate change. So I wanted to thank you for your efforts along those lines, and hope for more.
That wasn't a question, but I just want to say I agree with the notion that looking at the resources, our forest resources, for the multiple benefits to the environment, water quality, has been important, and Oregon Wild has been a tremendous partner. We really appreciate it.
Hi, I wanted to thank you for your thoughts on agricultural subsidies. It's something that I've been thinking a lot about too, and I wondered, are there other people, especially in this budget time right now, talking about actually addressing that thorny subject?
Great point. I actually had an amendment that got some bipartisan support to cap the agricultural subsidies to $250,000 to any farmer. And there's an opportunity here. There are people who understand the waste. There are other people who understand that it's misallocated. And a state like Oregon is cheated. Our farmers and ranchers don't get help for things that we should help them on, like the environment, marketing, and research. We have a farm bill that is coming up for reauthorization this year. We have people who are concerned about budget deficits. We have people that are concerned about nutrition, about wildlife habitat. I would hope that people think seriously about making the Farm Bill reauthorization a major environmental priority. We have a chance to have a coalition that includes animal welfare advocates to stop these huge confined animal feedlot operations. We have an opportunity to deal with child nutrition, the direct marketing, the organics. I mean, you sort of go through the list. There's an amazing array of people, a lot of them concentrated here in Oregon, that could be part of a powerful coalition that would also save the taxpayer money.
I agree. Well, thank you. Keep us informed of how we can help.
You betcha. Just contact my office and we'll be happy to keep you in the loop.
Great.
Would you necessarily be against having an initiative amendment in the federal Constitution such that after it was put in, the federal Constitution can be amended by some kind of initiative process? I'd like to remind you that Thomas Jefferson, our third president and author of our Declaration of Independence, thought that each generation of Americans should write its own Constitution.
Well, having watched how successful the initiative process has worked here in Oregon with its serial abuse over the years, I would be very hesitant to see us launch a process either for significantly rewriting the Constitution or including in it something like the initiative process. We're seeing, I think it's complicated enough. I think there's a lot of single issue advocacy that would be potentially very destructive, and that's something I'm
I know how to do it right. I'll send you my details, okay? I know how to do it right.
I'd like to thank everyone for coming, and let's give a round of applause for Congressman Blumenauer. And now Elizabeth Brown is going to introduce our next keynoter.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Brown, and I am a law student here at the university. And it's my honor to introduce and welcome Dr. Arjun Makhijani as a keynote speaker at this year's conference. Dr. Makhijani is the president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research in Takoma Park, Maryland. He holds a Ph.D. in engineering with a specialization in nuclear fusion from the University of California at Berkeley, and he is a recognized authority on energy issues. I have had the privilege of working with Dr. Mahkijani since 2008 in my position as a clean energy advocate for Public Citizen and the Sustainable Energy and Economic Development Coalition in Texas. Dr. Mahkijani helped further our goal of creating a more sustainable energy sector in Texas by serving as an expert for our organizations in several capacities, including writing a report on the energy efficiency potential of the city of San Antonio and serving as an energy consultant to municipal and state governments and utilities. He is also an expert in our public interest interventions in the licensing of 2 nuclear power plants in Texas, on everything from the utilities' failure to fully evaluate the alternatives of energy efficiency, renewable energy, and storage, to the utilities' inaccurate radiation dosage models, high-level waste, and the bioaccumulation of radioactive tritium in the food chain. Dr. Mahkijani is sitting on a panel tomorrow afternoon if any of you would like to hear more about issues surrounding nuclear power. Dr. Mahkijani is the author and co-author of numerous reports and books on energy and environment-related issues. He was the principal author of the first study of the energy efficiency potential of the U.S. economy in 1971. He is the author of Carbon-Free and Nuclear-Free, a Roadmap for U.S. Energy Policy, published in 2007. This book is the first analysis of a transition to a U.S. economy based completely on renewable energy without the use of any fossil fuels or nuclear power. In 2007, Dr. Mahkijani was elected Fellow of the American Physical Society. He was named a Ploughshares Hero by the Ploughshares Fund in 2006. He was awarded the Jane Bagley Lehman Award of the Tides Foundation in 2008 and the Joseph Butler Nuclear Free Future Award in 2001. Dr. Mahkijani has testified before Congress and has served as a consultant on energy issues to utilities including the Tennessee Valley Authority, the Edison Electric Institute, the Lawrence Berkeley Laboratory, and several agencies of the United Nations. He has worked on nuclear waste policy in France and Spain, and he and his colleagues are currently in the midst of finishing studies on zero CO2 electricity systems for Utah and Minnesota. His talk this evening is entitled Carbon-Free and Nuclear-Free, a Roadmap for U.S. Energy Policy. It's my extreme pleasure to welcome Dr. Arjun Makhijani.
Thank you so much. You know, you get a long introduction if you're really old. And I am really old. I don't feel old. I feel pretty good. I want to tell you how I got here, not today. When I graduated from, I came from the Washington, D.C. area, and when I graduated from engineering school in Bombay, I thought I should go to the United States for graduate study, and I applied to some famous places. And then I got the idea it might be nice to go to school in the capital of the country, and so I applied to Washington State University. And they gave me this wonderful assistantship, and I said yes. And then I found I was 3,000 miles off. And anyway, I won't say go Cougars here. Go Ducks? Okay. Anyway, so I want to show you two people. No, those are not people. The guy on the left, how many people know who he is? How many people recognize him? Thank you, Congressman. He is the father of energy policy in this country. He was worrying about oil imports when he worked in the White House in the 60s. His name is S. David Freeman. He's one of my favorite people. He's absolutely wonderful. He has a terrific sense of humor. He's my mentor. I worked for him in Washington during the first energy crisis. He ran the TVA. He ran the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. He's run public utilities. He knows electricity. He's a lawyer and an engineer. And 5-6 years ago, he made a speech at a conference sponsored by one of my other very dear friends, Helen Caldicott, who was having a conference on energy. And Dave made this speech that shocked me as an electrical engineer. You know, electrical engineers' first job is to keep the lights on, and the second job is to make sure your bills are reasonable. And then everything else comes. If those two conditions are not satisfied, you can't do anything else. And he said, we should get rid of oil, we should get rid of coal, we should get rid of nuclear, and we should go to solar. And I went up to him and I said, you know, Dave, you're going to send every industry we have left to China. And he said, well, I can't repeat the language that he used, but he's very colorful, and he said, in essence, that why don't you stop being a naysayer and do a study for us on, and Helen, who's a physician, said, you know, the planet is in intensive care, and I really agree with her. The planet is in intensive care. And she said, if you do this study, and I hadn't done a bottom-up energy study since the 1970s when I worked for Dave, and she said, I'll raise the money. Now, as somebody who runs a small nonprofit, this was an offer I couldn't refuse. So I did. I actually went into the idea of thinking about a 100% renewable energy system, thinking it couldn't be done at reasonable cost. Of course, with enough money, you could do it. I didn't think it could be done at reasonable cost. But when I looked carefully at materials I hadn't been studying for, I'd been worrying about nuclear weapons and radioactive pollution for quite some time, I realized that we're in the midst of a technological revolution. So the kinds of problems that we have that got us the planet into intensive care can actually be solved at reasonable cost. I actually disagree with those who say that it's going to cost more to get rid of fossil fuels and nuclear power. I also disagree with people who say we have to solve, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. But I concluded that we could go to a completely renewable and efficient energy system using about the same fraction of GDP for energy that we do now. Now, I did a very conventional framework, so I wouldn't get into arguments about leaving your car and going to the bicycle. I realized that that was a very important change. But my advisory board, which consisted of Dave and Helen and DuPont and economic justice activists, said, don't get into that argument. Show that it's technically possible in a conventional framework, and then we can, so if we do all these other things, it'll obviously be easier and cheaper and better and faster. And so I did that. So we used to have 3 energy problems until Washington got involved in trying to solve it. Now we have 4 energy problems. Of course, we had climate, and then, you know, even Alan Greenspan said the war in Iraq is about oil. And Henry Kissinger has said the same thing. So I can use that cartoon. And then, of course, we have, it took me 40 years to come to this conclusion about nuclear power. You know, a nuclear reactor, all it does is boil water. Does it make sense to make plutonium in the course of boiling water? Does it make sense? Suppose it were really cheap. Suppose the Atomic Energy Commission had delivered on a promise that it knew was false. At the time it was made about too cheap to meter. I've written a book about this with a colleague of mine called Nuclear Power Deception. We researched all the studies that they had done to see what cost they actually estimate. That would be expensive. But suppose it were cheap. Would it make sense to make plutonium in the course of boiling water? And of course, now we have these corn to ethanol mandates, which just totally are driving me. Anyway. That's why I think we can solve the energy problems at the state level. And I really liked your idea, Congressman. If the federal government could set a goal of becoming completely carbon neutral and clean energy in 25 years, I think it would lift the rest of the renewable energy and efficiency sector if all those buildings could eliminate 60% of their energy footprint and meet the other 40% with wind, solar, and storage. I think we could eliminate the subsidies for solar and wind because that would be, that's my favorite. I actually don't like subsidies. Right? In that sense, I guess I'm different from many others who advocate renewable. Here's what it would take for nuclear energy to make a serious contribution to reducing CO2, and it can. Not completely replacing coal, but a serious contribution to replacing coal worldwide. We'd need about 2,500, 3,000 reactors. They'd make about 90,000 bombs worth of plutonium every year in the course of running. You can't make bombs with that plutonium because you have to separate it first. We'd have to build, the things at the top are the kind of enrichment plants that Iran is building. You know about the one in Iran. Have you heard about the one in New Mexico that just got built? No? You know, preaching temperance from a bar stool. Okay. All right. Now, we failed to solve our nuclear waste problems because they're very hard to solve. And now we've got a Blue Ribbon Commission after $10 billion. We're $10 billion in the hole and farther back than square one. Here's what people have said about the proliferation implication. Oppenheimer thought you could hide nuclear weapons plants inside nuclear power plants. Saudi Arabia said, you know, we're doing peaceful energy, but it's about Israel and Iran. It was a very weird statement they made in announcing peaceful nuclear energy a few years ago. And Mohammed al-Baradei, who's now famous for being one of the leaders for freedom in Egypt, when he was head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, he said all this stuff about nuclear power, 90% of it is for deterrence. Well, you have the exact quote there. Lots of people want nuclear power. It doesn't make sense as a boiler, but it may make sense for other things. You'll hear that you can put all of the waste from a nuclear power plant under a tennis court. I've heard that at least, except not my tennis court. But you don't hear about the 250 million tons of mine waste and 250 million tons of mill tailings and so on that we have. And all right, and the depleted uranium that's sitting there in the rusting barrels, 750,000 tons of that. Now, you will hear, how many have heard that the French have solved the nuclear waste problem? And we should recycle nuclear waste like the French. Recycling, obviously, a wonderful thing. Now, I have to tell you, I love the French. I really do. This is not anti-French. This is not about freedom fries. I love the French. I sleep next to one of them every day, the same one. Now, they do generate 75, 80% of their electricity from nuclear, but they don't like nuclear waste in their backyard. I just came back from France. We've done 2 studies of their repository program. They don't have a waste repository. They reprocess their spent fuel. They extract the plutonium, which is just 1% of the spent fuel, and they make it into new fuel. In the course of it, they discharge 100 million liters of radioactive liquids. They don't call it waste, it's just discharges. They've polluted the oceans all the way to the Arctic. 11 Western European governments have said, "Uncle, please stop," and they won't. Of course, the French pollute the English Channel and the British pollute the Irish Sea, so it's okay. And they spend more money, they increase the amount of waste, and they don't have a repository, and they still have to deal with the high-level waste, and they've got liquid high-level waste stored there in tanks that if those tanks lose electrical power, not my calculation, the Norwegian Radiation Protection Authority calculated that if a tank in England lost power and had, well, they hypothesized an accident, that it would cause radioactive pollution in Norway somewhere between 10% and 5,000% of the pollution caused there by the Chernobyl accident. All right, so this is not a good thing to do. It doesn't solve any problem. Wall Street hates nuclear power because it's too risky. Every single nuclear power plant ordered after October 1973 was canceled. Often these projects cost more than the entire market capitalization of the company. They call it a bet the farm risk. So the head of GE, Mr. Immelt, who sells nuclear power plants, and he sells gas turbines, and he sells wind turbines. It's called hedging your bets. So what did he say? He told the Financial Times that if I were the CEO of a utility, I would never do nuclear. I think that's almost an exact quote. I would do gas or wind. And today it makes more sense to do gas and wind than it did when he made that statement in November 2007. Now, of course, utilities don't want to risk investor money. I've heard them say this openly. We will not risk investor money. And Wall Street banks won't finance them. So of course we want to risk taxpayer money. It's not their money, you know. I don't know how many taxes they pay, but most of it doesn't come from them. We can solve this problem without nuclear, and it won't happen overnight, of course. You know, we're in a very deep hole, so we don't want to make plutonium. Here are the choices. Today we heard about the view, and some people don't like, you know, you go to Vermont and they don't like windmills on the ridges, and you don't want hydrofracking, and you don't want coal, and okay. Here are the choices. You freeze in the dark, which is okay with me. Then you can complain. You can complain you don't like windmills, you know. Then you don't have, then you have standing. Or, okay, thank you, Nina. All right. Or you go on consuming fossil fuels, which is putting us more into intensive care. And it is not looking good. I'm pretty conservative on the scientific calls. Or you go off-grid, which is very expensive today. It might be okay someday, but it's hard. It's hard to do all the storage, and especially if the government isn't subsidizing you. I've got solar on my roof, but to add, I talked to the people who installed it, to add the batteries and so on. He said, don't even think about it, just install a propane generator if you want, backup. Or you do nuclear, which means you're making bomb material every time you turn the light switch on. Or you look at the view. Now, if my kids don't like the view, they can take down those wind turbines and recycle the steel. I can tell you that the French have more nuclear waste as a result of reprocessing. And they will have more difficult waste to get rid of. And the kinds of reactors that could reduce the amount of plutonium, we've spent $100 billion worldwide trying to commercialize them and failed. And people still want to spend more money, because taxpayer money. We can eliminate 70% of the energy footprint of buildings. We know how to do this at reasonable cost, and it really would be good if there were, I don't think that, there were some good things in the Markey-Waxman bill, actually, which came out of your committee, that about buildings, and I wish we could have them in federal law, but I know that we won't anytime soon. But I think we can have them in state law, and we need to create a market. Builders need to build efficient buildings, that they won't do it unless, it's just like cars and safety belts, and there's, the pizzazz is in the granite, and I love the cherry blossoms outside my house and the azalea bushes, and that's why, you want a beautiful house and so on, and you attend to the energy bills when they come. And there ought to be some norms when a planet is in intensive care, just the way as there are norms for fire, and there are norms for safety, and there are norms for seismic design, there should be norms for fuel use. We know how to do this. There are 38,000 zero-energy buildings in Germany or Western Europe, and here we have 12, I think, or 14, by the count of the New York Times. There's plenty of solar energy. 12% of the area of Nevada could supply all of the electricity requirements of the United States. I'm not suggesting we centralize it that way. It's not a very secure thing to do. But just to give you an idea of how much there is, there's lots of rooftops and so on. Okay, doesn't shine all the time. There's that cloud. All right, so this is my first bumper sticker from my book, Parking Lots Are the Answer. Okay, so if we don't like, it in the desert and so on, and I do think that we're going to need some, we're going to bite the lip and do some difficult things that you need to do to get out of intensive care, because there's not a lot of time. And it's not looking good, especially in the last 2 years. It's not looking good. And there are lots of things that are not in those models of temperature, 1.5 and 2.5. There's lots and lots of things that are, one of the star climate modelers used to work for me. He's a wonderful man. He's a professor at Purdue now. And you read their stuff, and what's in the fine print and doesn't show up in the consensus IPCC documents. That's, well. Okay, so we know how to store sunshine. This is actually a nuclear reactor system with a nuclear reactor 93 million miles away. It's free. It's a thermonuclear reactor. This is my field. I did nuclear fusion. I did my doctorate in this, what's going on in the sun. So of course you need to make some investment to collect the photons. But by the time it gets here, the photons are very nice. And the upper atmosphere have eliminated most of the ultraviolet bad ultraviolet radiation, and the rest of it is good for vitamin A, or D, I think. And you can store the energy in molten salt. And this was actually created for a nuclear reactor in Oak Ridge in the 1950s, molten salt nuclear reactor. And then you make steam, and you're on a turbine, and you can actually do dry cooling. It's less efficient, but you don't need water with this, very little water. You need to clean the mirrors, basically. Okay, so these are the wind areas, and you can see the importance of offshore wind. The left is the population, and the right is the wind areas. There's 10 times as much wind energy potential compared to the electricity generation today. More than all the oil production in all the OPEC countries put together, right? Just here. But we are having a hard time getting one wind farm off of Cape Cod because people don't like the view. And today we heard, I was in that coal workshop, and people were saying, okay, so it's okay for Kentucky and West Virginia to be devastated for us to be able to look at the view. And I think if we're going to consume the electricity, then at least we should look at where it's coming from. That might be healthy. So offshore is good. It will be commercial. It's not as good as onshore wind. In North Dakota, onshore wind, where the winds are very strong, onshore wind is not much different than a new coal-fired power plant today, by my calculation. You can store wind underground using compressed air energy storage. So the nuclear people will tell you, oh, you need base load, and what are you going to do when the wind doesn't blow? Well, when the wind doesn't blow, when you've got too much wind, you compress air and you store it. We know how to do this. There are large plants with compressed air storage that are running. You see compressed air storage and use every time you go to the garage and he's taking your tires off or putting them back on. So these are the thermodynamics of it. There's new technology. So air conditioning doesn't need to have the compressor when you need the air conditioning. This is an air conditioner that makes ice and runs the air conditioner off of the ice. It can make ice when the wind is blowing. There's a 50 megawatt experiment going on. They're burying these things under a parking lot in Southern California. And that way, in the middle of the day, you don't have a peak problem anymore. Okay, so that's a model of a house in Sacramento as to how that would work. Japan has sodium-sulfur batteries. Now, sodium-sulfur batteries are still on the expensive side. The compressed air energy storage costs 3 cents. Wind costs 7, 8, 9, 10 cents, depending on where you are. When you add it all up, it's still cheaper than nuclear, unsubsidized nuclear. You can always make something, the cost of something go away by subsidizing it till the cost goes away. Okay. Right? So, I mean, you have to say, well, what's it going to cost a nuclear power plant? And it's very difficult because nobody wants to finance it. But I've done it. I get paid to do that. The electric car, it would be good to get rid of oil from the land transportation system altogether. So either bicycles, walking, zoning, I think all that actually is very primary and before this. But in a conventional framework, I like the batteries in this pickup truck because they can be charged and discharged lots of times, and you can loan your battery to the grid for storage and discharge. And this can be a very important part of. This is also an electric car, but I don't like the batteries, but I like the car better. It's a midlife crisis. It's much cheaper than a Lamborghini and performs the same. You can buy one for $100,000. So that's a future gas station. All right, so I did a 100% renewable energy model for Utah using wind, solar, and compressed energy, air energy storage. And you can see how it would work. The black line is the electricity demand, and the yellow is the solar, and the blue is the wind. And you can see whenever it's above above the black line, you've got surplus energy, and then the purple is how much you're storing, and you lose some, of course. The area of the purple is less than the area above the black line. You lose about 25% of the energy. And the green is when you're withdrawing from storage, when you've got deficits. And so this is how it would look in June. So now you don't, actually you've got lots of surplus energy in the summer because you have lots of solar and you have lots of wind. And your problems of the electricity sector are completely transformed. You run into deficit problems in the winter when there are long periods with not enough solar and not enough wind, and then this is not a very good way to solve the problem, but I did it this way to show that even when you do a brute force centralized approach, I want to show that under very difficult circumstances and poor assumptions, it's still cheaper than nuclear. Still, even without saying what all the waste is going to cost us. And of course, the water consumption of this is 1% or 2% of the water consumption. Okay. Every nuclear power plant will consume by evaporation 10 to 20 million gallons of water every day. All right, so what about the rest of the energy sector? Well, hydrogen would be a very good thing to make from wind, but today kind of expensive. We should really go there. I have advocated that the president should do something for his home state of Kansas by funding, trying to get funded. It's a little late now, it should have been done before November. But hydrogen-powered aircraft initiative. Did you know that airplanes have been converted to run on hydrogen? You think hydrogen is very dangerous? Kerosene doesn't burn? Okay. Gasoline doesn't burn? Gasoline is very dangerous too. You know, every car is a very dangerous thing. You've got 20 gallons of gasoline in it. And hydrogen actually goes straight up. So there are some safety advantages and disadvantages to hydrogen. It's light. Have an accident, it goes right up. It doesn't spread on the ground and engulf everything. Anyway, my second bumper sticker is weeds are the answer, in the plural. Now, so you have microalgae, and you have water hyacinths. Now, out of corn, you get 300 gallons an acre. You can get 10,000 gallons an acre out of this. And of course, you can also use it as a substitute for coal. We may need to withdraw carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, so this may not be a bad idea to join this with carbon capture and storage. I'm not against it. It's one of those, that intensive care metaphor. You sometimes have to do bad things to yourself to get out of intensive care. It's the normal mode. You want to minimize the bad things, but I'm willing to consider them because I do believe, I do agree with Helen that our planet is in intensive care. How to create a science-based discussion, this I will write about after my retirement. Okay, so it doesn't take a lot of land to do this, except if you go to biofuels, even with these aquatic weeds. So this is one reason actually to make everything electric. I know a visionary who works for a utility and gets paid to think. That's his job. I love that. And he said we should get rid of fire. I think that's a really wonderful idea. We should get rid of fire from the energy system. And you can, you know, you go to hydrogen and fuel cells and electricity from wind and solar, and you've gotten rid of fire. And fire really is not just a good thing, which has enabled us to do lots of wonderful things like boil water, but it's also the principal source of pollution. You know, when you think about it, fossil fuels, we burn fossil fuels, and they're the main source of headache, literally and figuratively. Okay. So we consume 1 to 2 trillion gallons of water that we can save if we go to renewable energy. We really need to think through distributed energy. So what's stopping us? Let me just get, so we can, I got all the graphs and charts. What is stopping us? How much time do I have? Huh? I still have half an hour? I can carry on like a windbag? Okay. All right, then let me show you some of these charts. So, this, according to my estimate, you can actually do a lot more things like transportation with electricity and not increase the electricity consumption, because there's that much room in the US economy for efficiency. And this is without taking into account like bicycles. So it's saying, you know, we'll drive more and we'll live more in the suburbs. If you do what the congressman was saying, you have a more sensible zoning, you have more sensible bicycle, you know, you have more sensible transportation system and public transportation. And I was just in France actually presenting a report on the nuclear waste repository. I mean, I'm serious about France, a wonderful country. The trains over there work wonderfully well. The public transportation works. The healthcare system works really well. And they're more efficient. I got from the airport in Paris to Lille in 50 minutes by the fast train. And coming back, we got cheap tickets, and it cost 19 euros. It cost 19 euros to go from 250 kilometers. Think metric. Okay. So we can get rid of, we don't need electricity growth, we just need electricity transformation. We can do a mix of centralized and decentralized. It's more secure. Actually, we'll have a safer, more reliable electricity system. And we can do more things with the electricity. Now, actually, I regard this as very timid now, given how the technology has evolved since I finished my book 2-3 years ago. I think we can do it faster than 40 years. I think the electricity sector can be completely transformed in 25 years. I think we can have 100% renew, but what are we missing is the guts. We have the technology. It's not all here, you know, so the technology will evolve. It won't happen like with these specific, you know, wedges. I think we have a very good energy secretary for R&D. He really has some very good ideas, and he needs to give his guy $500 million a year, which isn't even chump change in Washington, to be able to do the, you know, the risky R&D. But even without the risky R&D, we have the elements of the technology. With the batteries, you know, a lot of it is just scale. So you can have decentralized solar cells, but the manufacturing of the solar cells will have to be larger scale. And it's still shaking itself out. All the technologies are not here. It'll take about 10 years. But it's happening faster than what I thought it would happen. It's 3 years ago. I thought when I finished my book for the first time that I would actually try to work on the Hill. But I gave up on the Hill in Washington, D.C., in Congress. But I gave up. It's out of my league. I work at the state level. And I really do think that from this immigrant's reading of American history and from what I've seen from personal experience, that the state and local level is where it is going to be transformed. I mean, before states' rights got a really bad name during the Civil War, and deservedly so, there was the 1850s. During the 1850s, states' rights was a very proud banner for the northeastern states who were resisting the federal government and the slave owners and saying, it's our right to harbor fugitive slaves. States' rights was aligned with the freedom of slaves who had escaped from their slave masters and were seeking freedom. There's that tradition. It's a wonderful tradition. We cannot allow the federal government to say, California can't do it better or stronger or have more efficient cars. It's absolutely ridiculous for the federal government to say California cannot set its air pollution rules when it's the 7th largest economy in the world. California gave us leadership in refrigerator standards. Let me tell you about refrigerators. So what happened? Economists drive me up the wall. So economists will tell you that regulations are a bad thing, that taxes are better. So if you want to penalize something and internalize the cost, you put a tax on it. It's not always the best way to do things. Look at gasoline. If you put $1 a gallon tax on gasoline, we've had $1 tax on gasoline from just the price rises, right? It was $4 a gallon, and it caused people to buy some more efficient cars. In Europe, they pay $8 a gallon, and they have, 40 miles a gallon instead of 25. But it doesn't solve the problem. Their CO2 emissions are still going up. But if you have regulations that say you're going to get 100 miles per gallon by 2050, and you're going to improve by 8% every single year, it's going to happen because we have the technology. We know, it's not that you set standards that you cannot meet. You have to have engineers. No, I'm just kidding. Get rid of the economists. No. I'll give you the example of refrigerators. When I first started working in energy, a frost-free refrigerator was a novel thing that took 1,800 kilowatt hours for an 18 cubic foot refrigerator. Anybody can do the math. That means about 15% of the American people. That's 100 kilowatt hours per year per cubic foot. Now, then there were efficiency standards, got tighter and tighter and tighter, and now, today, the consumption per cubic foot of a refrigerator that I bought last year, I think, replaced my clunker, is about 20 or 25 kilowatt hours per cubic foot. 75% of the energy footprint of this refrigerator is gone. Now, the economist would tell you that if you do that by regulation, the cost will go up. But the cost of the refrigerator has actually come down. The refrigerator is much cheaper today than it was back then, and 75% more efficient. I'll tell you, one thing the economists have right that you can observe at work is that if you have a regulation that's sensible, that is worked out, technologically possible, and you have competition, you have to have some competition. You have to have half a dozen refrigerator manufacturers. Then they will give you the refrigerators and they will compete and the price will settle itself. We have to have regulations for buildings. The price, believe me, the price of these, it isn't cheaper necessarily to build an inefficient building. The cost of the granite counters, many of which give you unhealthy dose of radiation because of all the radon that's coming out of them, may be less than really building a first-class home. Now you can put I love the azalea bushes, but it doesn't mean you have granite counters and no insulation. That makes no sense. But the builder knows you love azalea bushes and granite counters, and that's what he's going to do, and that's why it's called the split incentive, if you want the technical term. The builder has no incentive to minimize your electricity bill, and you pay the bill but aren't paying attention when you buy the house. Now, the one thing that I want from the federal government is to get its house in order. Please, in 25 years, go zero CO2 without making more plutonium. I don't think it's too much to ask. The second thing I would ask President Obama, and today I understood from the Sierra Club speaker that he has actually said that, I must have missed it, that he should say that he will veto any bill that will take away the EPA's right to regulate pollutants, or reduce it to regulate pollutants, including CO2, under the Clean Air Act. That's all we need. There's actually a woman at the head of the EPA who has a lot of guts. She has a lot of experience. She is competent. I don't know her. I'm not, you know, I observe what she has done. She is being shackled by the political climate in Washington. And I think there needs to be a bar outside the door for politics of messing around with the Clean Air Act. And no matter if we really value the environment, if we really think that this is intensive care, that's the minimum that needs to be done. The other piece of that is you cannot undermine the state's rights to do better than the federal government. That's like saying, you got 90, and I'm going to prevent you from getting 92. Hello. That's not sensible, because the states that are far ahead, okay, so they have stronger pollution laws, they're willing to pay the price, they have their elections. If they don't like the politician that they did that, they can always boot them out, and we do see it happening. But for the federal government to say that you cannot do it better in the states, there is a strong case to say you can't do it worse. There's a minimum of social, political, civil rights norms that should be laid down for everybody, not just in this country, but worldwide. That's far, but at least we can do it one country at a time. People are struggling for it. But to say that California or New York cannot do it better, there's a pathology of control in that, okay, let me give you an example of what happened with the ozone layer protection and then leave you with this thought. I did different things than ozone layer protection, but in the mid-'80s it looked like it was not going to be pretty. And the way I found out was the projections of ozone layer depletion were getting so serious with the Antarctic ozone hole, I had to pull out my what happens in a post-nuclear war world report from the National Academy. And it was a horrendous, horrendous scenario we were headed toward, potentially. My wife, who's not only French but also a chemist, wanted to work on ozone layer protection, and so we started a project. And, in Sweden, once this problem became clear, that the industrialists, the environmentalists, civil society, and the government, and the technological people sat down and figured out what was possible, and they passed a law saying we're going to get rid of CFCs by January 1, 1995. And here we were still saying, well, maybe, you know, we might go back to the caves and we won't have car air conditioning. They make Volvos in Sweden. And then we said, well, by 2000, and then we got rid of them by 1995 anyway. But there was a lot of resistance, and there's a knee-jerk resistance to regulations that's most unhealthy. It comes from an even unhealthier part of the American history, but I won't go into that in this talk. You have to invite me back. But this knee-jerk idea that government is illegitimate, and even in creating a regular, because there has been an illegitimate part of government. Anyway, you know, how this country was created and whose land it was on and all that. So the function of government is seen very differently here, and it's very unhealthy to say we need government to set a level playing field. The government's going to honor the contracts. My roommate in college, when I used to teach, the fellow professor, he said, well, you know, government shouldn't be setting a minimum wage. I said, okay, let's get government out of our lives altogether. How about the government not insure your bank account? He said, no, not that. Okay, so we have to settle this question that government is legitimate and it is there for certain, at least minimum things in an urban society. We're not living on individual farms 200 years ago where we could all look after ourselves. We're living in an urban society. Even farms depend on it. I have friends who are farmers, and one of the couple works outside, you know, in a factory as an accountant so they can run their farm. And that's typical for how family farms work. We have to get this philosophical piece right, otherwise we will not be able to get the rules for how we live and relate to each other in place. And I think really the places to start are local. Your university presidents have all signed saying they're going to do these wonderful things for climate and energy. You have to hold their feet to the fire to see that they actually get it done. So many mayors, 750, have signed climate pledges. You've got many states with very good laws. They can be improved, but we really need more guts. I really would like to see one state that says we are going to get rid of fossil fuels in the next 30 years, or 40 years even. The timetable can always be shortened, and it will be shortened. But we need to set that bold goal and say, okay, we're going to get this done. I've been in the energy business for 40 years. I haven't yet made a major technical call that I've had to withdraw, like, you know, some car or something. I've not recalled any major technical conclusion on environment and energy that I've put before the public. And I put this very carefully. You can download my book free at IEER.org. Been downloaded 500,000 times or something. Helen said, put it up for free downloading. I said, have you put up your book for free downloading? She said, no, but you should put up your book for free downloading. because it's going to save the planet. And, you know, Helen thinks in those kind of terms. I don't, but because she raised the money and I honor Helen and I love her dearly and she's a very good friend, I did it, and she was right, of course, I was wrong. Lots of people have used it. Do it. Make things happen in your university and in this state, and thank you for inviting me. Hi, Mark.
Okay, that's better, thank you. I want to offer a different book for downloading that agrees with this about 90%, but not quite 100%.
Disagreement is excellent.
Searching for a Miracle by Richard Heinberg, which is looking at the same issue as how are we going to do this as the concentrated energy for making all this stuff goes away. Because when I bought a kilowatt of solar and 2 kilowatts of wind, it took a lot of fossil fuels to make them, and to transport them. And when you factor this in, the conclusion I've come to from using this stuff is that we will have a smaller, steady state economy with a local food system because you're not going to run airplanes on wind turbines.
Yeah, no, well, actually, I don't know about that. But I agree that, you know,
Postcarbon.org is where you can get this.
Yeah, no, I agree. You know, we need a different kind of economic setup. I've also written a book on the global economy. I'm a kind of a intellectual entrepreneur. I won't make a lot of money, but yeah, I agree with the idea that we have to have a different economic framework, but it'll be tough getting there. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for your very wonderful speech. So I think I have you many lectures, so we just got this message, you know, technology is there, you know, we use this high technology to reduce, you know, waste and increase the energy efficiency. Seems like in science, this field, we have done a lot of research about using high-tech solutions to address this energy problem. However, it seems like little research has been done on how we apply some low-tech solutions, very like indigenous, solution. When look at the people, use the natives like Americans or other indigenous people, they use very efficient way to address the issue. I mean, so do you think that the next step, the science field or the scientists should also look more about applying these low-tech solutions to address this overall efficiency, not just this high-tech, solutions, solar or wind? Any thoughts of that?
Yeah, well, I wouldn't divide it as high-tech and low-tech. I think it's better to think of it as less efficient and more efficient, and whether it's polluting or not polluting, rather than high-tech or low-tech. Mostly poor people, what we think of as low-tech, the way poor people live, for example, happens to be extremely inefficient. I mean, I've worked in the villages in India, and read by those kerosene wick lamps. They're extremely inefficient. Wood stoves are extremely inefficient. You could cook for 20 people with the amount of wood that a single Kenyan uses to make charcoal today. So traditional technology, usually in the energy sector, actually pretty inefficient. Where I would agree with you is in the thinking. We have the idea of Western science, and that's the only kind we have so far in terms of thinking, has delegitimized all other kinds of knowledge as valuable. So we've delegitimized traditional knowledge. So the way a hunter learns to hunt from his father, or in the traditional culture, is not the same, is not scientific. But you see pharmacological companies going to tribes in Brazil to find plants to turn into high-tech medicines. And so there is something to what you say, but we have to first value that knowledge and put it in the context that we need it.
Right. I mean, like by this traditional technology, usually, like for example, in one village in China, the people use running water below their house to cool down their house in the summer.
Yes.
And we also learned that in Inca culture, in the ancient time, Inca culture, they have very advanced agriculture technique, but then later they were invaded by the Spanish, and this kind of technology, kind of lost. And so, I mean, by
yes, I see what you mean.
Yeah,
there are traditional technologies that could be very useful, like the building technologies in Arabia, for example, for cooling buildings, evaporative cooling of natural evaporative cooling of buildings. But so we can look to traditional technologies especially in buildings for inspiration. But I wouldn't knock. But we have to bring it into the culture where we're going to have 8 billion people in this world. All these people, so long as they are here, deserve to live well. We can have a notion of enough, and I would agree with Mark, we need a notion of enough. But I don't believe that using traditional methods, you can actually cleanly provide enough in the way that I would consider enough for my family and my children very easily without using modern technology.
Okay, thank you.
We're just going to take 2 more questions.
Hi, I appreciated your comments about energy storage as being critical to balancing intermittent renewables. You talked about compressed air energy storage as one of those methods where you use renewable energy to compress air in subterranean caverns, sometimes usually using natural gas. And you spoke with some degree of confidence about applying that technology across the United States. My understanding of compressed air energy storage is that there's only been one plant here domestically in the United States, and there's not a lot of good data on that. So I'm wondering why you spoke with such confidence about scaling up this technology.
Yeah. Actually, there are 2 plants that have run on quite a large scale. There's one in Alabama and one in Germany. It's the same technology, so the fact that it happened in Germany doesn't bother me. It's 290 megawatts. It's run since 1978, and so it's fine. Also, we actually use compressed storage technology to store natural gas all over the country. It's the standard technology. It's exactly the same thing, except it's air instead of natural gas. There are plenty of storage sites. You can store compressed air and compressed natural gas in aquifers as a big bubble, compressed bubble. There's plenty of rock. So there's no element of the technology that's missing. You know, we know how to do it. So it's been operational. All of the components are available in the marketplace. You just have to arrange them in a particular arrangement. It's like, you know, having a split level instead of a rambler. I mean, it's not a different thing that we seek to do. And I'm not saying that it should be the main solution. I just used it because it illustrates what you can do with what's here today. Actually, I think I didn't talk about a smart grid and what it is. I'll just take the opportunity to say it. A smart grid is really premised on the idea that we have a dumb grid today, right? The amount of communication between the consumer of electricity and the producer of electricity at all points of consumption, the amount of information in that system can be put on a single flash drive of 10 gigabytes. That's it. It's a $20, that's why it's a dumb system. There's no two-way communication, it's just from the switch. How to design a smart grid that's secure and private at the same time is a tough problem, but we need to go there. We need to run the dishwasher when the wind is blowing and the washing machine, you know. So I think we can actually eliminate the need for much of the storage, although not all.
Hi, I wanted to make a kind of a comment and then find out what what you thought about it. When we first, I think, wanted to get electricity to this country, you know, we had county extension agents would go out and teach people how to wire their own houses, and then basically a lot of farmers and stuff like that would wire their own houses, and that's how we got, you know, a lot of electrification. You know, as a homeowner, I'm really interested in doing something like adding solar to my house or adding a mini split. I can buy solar panels at $2 a watt now, polysilicon solar panels, but I pay $6 to install them because I got to have a licensed installer to do it. It's the cost of installation. It seems like it stops more people from going out and installing them on their own who aren't really looking for government subsidies, but just want to go ahead and do it. I give another example of a mini split. I buy a mini split on eBay for $1,800. I got to spend $3,000 to have a guy go over and turn a couple valves, and I find that frustrating. A certain amount of government regulation for someone who really wants to, you know, add more, but is frustrated by the regulations that are actually stopping me from doing what I want to do. And I kind of wanted to hear what if you.
You know, I don't have an easy answer to your question. I think the regulations aren't there because something didn't work along the way. Somebody did an electric installation that resulted in a fire, and then it burned down a few houses, and people thought, we can't do things this way. You're putting your neighbors at risk. Now, you may be able to do it very well, and somebody may not do it very well. And so we have some norms of building, and then, of course, the regulations have become licensing, and licensing has become, you know, the occasion to charge more, and a significant part of the excess costs of solar, though, I think, are because we're subsidizing it. I think the actual cost of, I had solar put on my house last year, and it cost $5.75 before any subsidies a watt. By what I could figure was going on at the time was the actual, they could have sold it to me for $4.50. But it cost including the installation and everything. Of course, it costs to have all those people come to your house and put all the holes in your
I guess if I could do it myself and didn't feel like I was being an outlaw, I am going to be an outlaw.
Yeah.
But, you know, it just seems like we're putting a huge disincentive toward moving.
It is, I agree with you, but at the same time, there's kind of the honest and there's the incompetent, and there's the honest and competent and honest and incompetent and dishonest and unscrupulous and competent and dishonest and unscrupulous and incompetent. And actually, something that drives the system is the dishonest, unscrupulous, and incompetent. And then you've got all these regulations that cover everybody. And I don't know an easy solution to that problem in an urban society. In a society where shame is an important factor in the economy because everybody knows everybody else, that's an important restraint. But in an urban society where you don't know your neighbor and you don't care, shame is not a restraint. And so regulation in a way replaces shame. Now, how you bring shame back into the economy is an important problem. I don't have the wisdom to solve it for you, but I don't disagree with you, but I don't have a solution for your problem. Sorry.